send your friends in the X-Wing fighters?
I'll contact the New Republic. They're the greatest pirate busters in the galaxy.
Welcome to Decoding TV's coverage of the Skeleton Crew Season 1 finale. Patrick Klepek, there's some sad news we have to discuss before we even get into our thoughts on the Season 1 finale, which is that some of the ratings for Skeleton Crew have started coming in, and they are bad. I don't know if you saw this, but
I put my fingers in my ears and went la 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 la. That was my reaction, David.
Reading here from GameRant.com, according to Nielsen's December 2nd through December 8th streaming data, Star Wars Skeleton Crew premiered with the lowest viewership of any Star Wars series in its first week. The 2-episode premiere scored less than 382 million minutes watched. That is roughly 20% lower than the ratings for Star Wars the Acolyte's premiere week, which is the previous record holder for the lowest viewership of any Star Wars series debut. Star Wars Skeleton Crew also became the first series in the franchise to fail to debut in Disney Plus's top 10 originals. Pretty rough, and I think the message is now clear, Patrick. Any deviation from what people consider classic Star Wars shall not be tolerated. The low ratings will continue until morale improves, I think is kind of the message of this.
We'll see. Is there a world where the Acolyte was canceled so the budget could be put into the Skeleton Crew Season 2? I don't know. I saw an interview with John Watts, one of the co-creators and one of the principal creatives on the Skeleton Crew, in which they were asked about a potential Season 2, and he said the number that he was told that was the most important metric to look for was not so much how it came out of the gate, but because of its disconnection to a lot of the kind of like main elements that Star Wars is known for, it's what happens as the season goes along. And that's no guarantee of anything. Disney streaming in general is in a contraction period. Budgets are being kind of pulled back. And so I don't know if we'll get a Season 2 of Skeleton Crew, but as we'll get into our review, I'm thankful we got a Season 1, which is different than how we often feel about Disney Star Wars produced television. So I can't control the future, but I can control my reaction to the present.
Beautifully said, Patrick Klepek. Now, I will say that Skeleton Crew apparently wasn't as expensive as shows like The Acolyte. Apparently, this one only costs around $130 to $140 million. The Acolyte cost over $200 million. So maybe that's going to.
Good God!
You still are shocked by that number.
That's not. I mean, that's less of a chuckle specific at Acolyte as much as just how much some of these shows cost and the expectations then put upon them. We talked about that with the Acolyte. It's like, look, what were you expecting? You know what I mean? Just like $200 million on a bunch of characters nobody knows. At least Skeleton Crew comes in modest by comparison.
Right, modest, that's exactly right. So maybe the relatively low budget will save it. All that said, Patrick Klepek, we're going to talk about our thoughts on the Skeleton Crew finale as well as the show as a whole. What did you think of the Skeleton Crew finale? Do you think this finale landed the ship?
The show landed for me. I think this was right behind Andor as Season 1 as my favorite Star Wars television. I think Andor's off like its own little unicorn. I feel like it's almost unfair to compare Andor to anything. I quite liked the first season of Mandalorian specifically, and it like sits really comfortably next to Mandalorian as something that I just had a real joy watching. And I think this show in particular, it really threw some curveballs with some of the characters, as the villain in particular. And I like it pulls maybe a punch or two in terms of some finality with the characters in question. But I think Skeleton Crew is and was a joy to watch. I'm so glad that we had a chance to go on that ride with you and with the audience. And it gets my full recommendation as something that is entirely worth your time. And I think that is probably true even if you are not super high on Star Wars. I just think it's a good television show.
All right, a stirring endorsement from Patrick Klepek. Now, you said it's the second favorite thing you like behind Andor. I just want to make clear, there's a really big scale here, right? Like,
that's why that's why I put Andor to the. Right, it almost feels like unfair.
Like if I have three things, right? A filet mignon dinner,
mm-hmm.
a hot dog I found on the street, and a vat of acid, right? And the hot dog on the street is the second thing I like behind the filet mignon. But that's still way, way, way worse than the filet mignon dinner. You know what I'm saying?
But I like this stuff more than like on the Patrick scale. I think people are going to understand what I'm saying. On the
Absolutely.
David scale, your reaction to most Disney and Marvel stuff is, well, it's a vat of acid that I'm getting in for the for the audience, and I hope they enjoy the show.
All right, what did I think of the finale of Skeleton Crew? I'm just saying I don't like hearing anything compared to Andor, which I think is a masterpiece. That's kind of that's what that reaction
Andor,
was.
the prequel television series to the prequel move, like all Andor doesn't make any sense. It's like using that as a basis of comparison.
Right.
I feel like is unfair. It's like, wow, one of the greatest works in media in the last 10 years was also a prequel to a prequel about a character nobody really cared that much about. Wow. Let's just repeat that again. Seems like that's something we can follow. That's a model.
No lies detected. No lies detected there. What did I think of the finale of Skeleton Crew? It was fine. That's kind of how I feel about it. It had some nice moments. There are some fun reveals. I think it ends extremely abruptly. And I think there is a lot of emotional catharsis, in my opinion, that doesn't happen. That could, and ultimately, I still would recommend the show. I think it's fun. It's a fun romp. It's inconsequential. It has almost no bearing on anything else that happens in Star Wars.
Good for it.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely,
ringing endorsement.
Yeah, in parentheses, complimentary. But I think there were some things that the show tried to do that could have been executed much better, and we'll talk about them as we continue this conversation. So overall, I thought it was fine. I thought it was okay. I didn't think it was bad, but it did not rise to the series heights. Let me put it that way, right? Like,
sure.
I think the show has had some really nice highs, and I was hoping for a finale that'd be like, wow, you finish it, like leaving me feeling like, oh my god, what an incredible finale! Like, gotta recommend that show. And this finale did not do that for me, sadly. That said, let's talk about some of the stuff that happens in the finale. We're gonna spoil this finale for you, folks. The episode kicks off, and I have to say, I called it, Patrick Klepek. I called it. Last week on the podcast at Decoding TV, I predicted, hey, Jod igniting his lightsaber, it's going to be a big fake out. He's just going to be paying tribute to the parents or something like that. And I think I got that exactly right. So I just need to...
Great framing by the show, though. I mean, that's kind of where we landed on it was, hey, this is going to be shot from the audience perspective as potentially villainous, because sort of the way it's shot, like way from a distance, is kind of emotionally where our characters are. So I just... You were right. That made total sense, and I also still found it like very clever and fun.
Mm-hmm. So, Jod doesn't threaten the parents. He just basically says, "Hey, these kids have done some bad stuff. They need to be supervised by droids. Send them home."
He's pretty ominous, though. The vibes are bad. Like he does a poor job of selling that he's a good guy. Like immediately, it's like I think anyone would pick up on something a little bit weird is going on here.
I would agree, and I think this Jude Law is so fun to watch in the show, and he does such a great job of being evil in this episode. He's always trying to find the angles, and he knows exactly how to manipulate these people towards his ends. Overall, great Jude Law episode of Skeleton Crew. So, anyway, all the kids get sent home. Wim and his father have a reckoning with each other, and Jod decides to take Fern and her mom to go see the supervisor. Unclear exactly why that happens. Maybe he wants the hostage. Who knows? But they go and they meet the supervisor, who's voiced by Stephen Fry, and there's a massive reveal. The supervisor is a massive droid. It's an artificial intelligence. It's ruling over all the people. Super interesting concept, Patrick Klepek.
Mm-hmm.
Super interesting concept that I don't think the show does anything to explore or explain, in my opinion. What do you think?
No, it's fun to think about,
right.
But the show doesn't. Well, it kills it off awfully quickly,
right.
And then the characters never commented on it again. Which honestly I think is connected to and we will get to this as we discuss the end of the episode. But I enjoy the fast pace at which sort of like this reveal happens, and then it's kind of dealt with like in a very kind of like interesting way. If this show is desperately missing an epilogue where we like it could have done its own
Absolutely.
commentary on that. It's like we don't have to do it now. We don't have to like stop and like
Right.
do some exposition about like how Adden works and the relationship with this droid, but there would have been opportunities, I think, from a storytelling perspective that don't betray the finality of the ending and how it's presented. That also could have been like, well, how much did everybody know about like what was going on in this dusty little attic of Adden?
I would say that was one of my big disappointments of finale is they don't explore that idea at all. Is it a good thing that it's ruled by? It seems like it's bad, but like no one seems to reckon with it. And then also, what's going to happen with all these people afterwards? Presumably they're liberated, but like, is the society going to be okay if they no longer have their previous hierarchical structure anymore? Anyway, the show doesn't seem interested in any of these questions at all, or they literally just ran out of money. Like one of the two. I'm not sure, but I found that to be.
I
Pretty
think it's uninterested. Which, like, I'm with you that I wish the show had explored many of these ideas a little bit more. But one of the things that I said in our discussion of the last episode was, if the show is going to err on any side, I hope it errs on the side of focusing on the characters, and I just don't care that much about the mysteries of Adden. And I will say, it's an interesting place to be, where I was like, well, you did that for the most part, but then also some of the mysteries you revealed were pretty interesting, or like could have been.
Right.
But if I'm going to choose like a ratio, I prefer the ratio, or at least what the show was like trying to go for, rather than spending half the episode in like an ideological conversation with the droid.
Yeah. That's, it's actually clear now. You and I were completely reversed on that point, right? When we discussed the season premiere, I was saying how the mysteries are some of the more interesting elements of the show to me. Is what is the deal with Adden and all that stuff, and I found the kids to be extremely annoying, and so it's like, and then so the finale focused more on the kids, less on the mystery. It makes sense that you would like it more. So what is cool about the supervisor is he is able to figure out that Jod is lying.
Which are you lying about? Being an emissary or a Jedi?
And is able to determine that if Jod is saying he's a Jedi, that the Jedi have been branded as traitors by the Republic. So he's either a traitor or he's lying. Which one is it? And then that's when Jod kills the supervisor, which is actually pretty badass. And
they don't have a backup though. Like there's like no other hard drives in. Then again, this is also a world where like major elements of how the systems work on Adden are big glowy button that you just like big switch. I mean, whatever. I can move. None of that bothers me all that much, but it's sort of funny that like, well, you probably just have like another one of those around the corner, right? Like no backup. Anyway.
Yeah, sadly no, but yeah. Anyway, it shows you that Jod is willing to disrupt the entire planet that he just arrived at in pursuit of some treasure. I was a little shocked when he just kills him right out the gate. That was a nice moment. All power on the planet is knocked out, and Jod's ship, which he's been trying to get to come through the atmosphere, is able to land on Adden and just starts opening fire on people, which I thought was pretty shocking. They're just freaking blowing up cars and houses and stuff left and right, and it's brutal. But Jod is saying, hey, actually, don't kill too many people. I need these people to work for me. I need them to be my slaves, so don't kill them.
You can kill some of them, but not all of them.
You can kill some of them and rough them up, but not too bad. So clearly the plan has not been thought through that well.
Anyway. I will say I really enjoy. I'm sort of like alien invasions are like some of my favorite sort of types, like premises for films. And before that ship arrives, he calls it like an invasion. It does, like the way the visual effects are shot and composited, and the way they position it as like a UFO, like the way the light comes down, like if you look at it through that framing, like it absolutely seems like they conceived of this as like, and it works for, it's one of those rare moments. Like I still think the suburban stuff is sort of weird. I'm over it because the show is not like explicitly centered around that anymore. But this was a moment where it kind of worked, where it's like, oh man, they're shooting this like it's a UFO landing and then just opening fire in sort of a War of the Worlds sort of scenario. And that contrasted with a suburban look, like,
Yeah.
as someone that loves like UFO imagery and in sort of invasion films, like that, it worked. I was like, I've seen ships come through the sky plenty of times in Star Wars. And once again, as you've noted previously, like this show does like, it's smart about its visual effects and like uses them to great effect. And I thought that was another moment that was really effective.
I thought the visuals overall in the episode were great. Like I think the show looks pretty fantastic. Yeah, some of the stuff with the speed bikes or whatever they're riding through the town looked a little dodgy, but particularly the stuff with the Great Barrier is incredible. And so anyway, yeah, you're right. Like when the ship is coming through, it feels very transgressive and is well done. But anyway, the kids make a plan to call for help. They need to take off in the ship, get out into space, call Kim using the communication device or method that was given to them earlier, and then Kim the Owl is going to send X-Wings right away, even though no one knows where the hell this
Don't
place
worry
is.
about it. Don't worry about it.
They've got a hyperspace path right to this place. Don't worry about it.
Yep.
Don't worry about it. Anyway, so John is in the middle of enslaving the entire planet when all of a sudden Wim and Wendell show up and they distract Jod, and there's a big debate and discussion over whether they should shut down the Great Barrier, and Fern and her mom are deciding whether to do it. And we get a little bit of backstory from Jod. We learned that Jod was trained by a Jedi, but the Jedi was eventually killed in front of him, and that's what turned him off from being a Jedi. So now he only uses his Force powers for bad. We do get to see Jod use some Force powers against the families, and that is kind of cool. You know, it's kind of like, oh, like we've seen Jedi do that. It's more rare to see non-Jedi use Force powers. We saw a little bit in Ahsoka as well, right? Like we see that stuff happening. But anyway, it's some cool sequences with the Force. I thought,
and it's fun because this up until the last possible moment, the show is still seeding the idea that he's pulling a trick. Right? There's a moment where I think he lifts the lightsaber in his hand or something else in his hand, and one of the characters is like, it's just a trick, like, you know, like, and it's really not until this moment where he kind of lashes out,
right,
in defense and against the kids and against the parents, that he is sort of forced to reveal, like, actually, because I'll be like, everything that he has shown, or most what he's shown, like, whatever, you could explain that with a powerful magnet or something, you know what I mean? Like, there's a way that this could all work, and I really enjoyed that the show kind of plays with your expectations, the kids' expectations, in a way that when it's all finally confirmed and the facade is dropped, it's fun to watch.
Were you compelled at all by Jod's backstory? I thought it was kind of interesting, but it's pretty threadbare. You know, we don't get that much of his backstory.
It's tough. I like the fact that it was kept a mystery to us through the entirety of the season. I prefer that than halfway through the show we get some inkling about it from like a character off to the side that goes like, did you know, like, he used to be a Jedi? And then we go to a flashback where we like learn about like what happened to, like, see another version of Order 66 that we've seen many, many times in the show. It just feels like this is a show where the episodes aren't particularly long and it needs to accomplish a lot. And so I think what I'll say is this: it, like many things with this character, I question how effective it is on the page, but Jude Law elevates the material in this show and this character in particular in such a way that in like slightly lesser hands, I don't think it works nearly as well. So I think he conveys a lot in this sequence in particular, where they're in front of the supervisor, where, you know, he is evil. He's like, he is, or at least he's doing bad things, but there is just enough in his face, in the way he vocalizes, the way he enunciates, like there's a measure of restraint or regret in there, even as he continues to make poor choices and do bad actions. And I think that is a testament to his acting. So it's effective because I think Jude Law made the very little that was there effective, but I do wish there was I wish there could have been a little more time spent on it, rather than what appears the show decided on was like some paintings in the credits that like give you a little bit more of the backstory as the show finishes.
Indeed. I will say one thing I liked about the finale, and something I felt that really landed, is a line that Jude Law says that's very good. He says, "That's the galaxy. It's dark with a few pinpricks of light."
That's the galaxy. It's dark with a few pinpricks of light.
Yeah.
And I do think that the show did a good job of landing this idea of it's actually scary and upsetting out there, right? There's a lot of like bad things out there, and you can understand why the children in the show would long for kind of the safety and comfort of their 80s suburban home instead of the darkness and terror of the galaxy. And between Jude Law, how Jude Law is freaking murdering people left and right, his backstory, the ship coming in and just blowing things up, and them visiting these other planets that had all these terrible things happening, that part I think the show did a good job of landing, relatively speaking. So anyway, there is a big scuffle, and they eventually shut down the Great Barrier. There's this lever, and Fern convinces her mom, "Hey, we're going to shut down the Great Barrier," and they do it. And she decides, "Okay, I'm going to do it." And again, this is almost as big of a step as them killing the supervisor. Like, this is like a fundamental change to life as they know the world order as they conceived of it. I have to say, the scene when the Great Barrier shuts down is awesome. Like, just how it's visualized is incredible, and you see its impact. All the shots that they chose like, you see it from like people reacting to it. You see from inside of buildings what it looks like, and reflected on glass and all this stuff, and it just makes you feel the enormity of this decision, right? Like, oh, for the entire existence, all they have known is the Great Barrier, and now the Great Barrier has been shut down. And visually, I felt the visceral impact of it. And then they basically never refer to it again.
Again, I think that's where the absence of any sort of epilogue, I think, would have allowed them to do that in a very natural way that doesn't require them to, move out of the tension and the
right.
The speed of the scenes that are playing out in front of us. I think one of the parents should have died. Well, I think because part of what's happening there, right, is the kids sort of leave the safety of Ed-Atten kind of by accident, and along the way discover that yes, the world is a complicated place with lots of dangers, but like there's also a lot of good people, and there's like it's important to like step out of what you know and see what else is out there. You can always go home, but you'll never know that unless you leave it. And they sort of impart that lesson to their parents, but it felt a little too like, but the world is a little dangerous. Like the world is like a little dark, and like there are consequences sometimes for stepping out of it. And no one really experiences those consequences, like except for the supervisor. And like maybe even if it was revealed that like one of the parents didn't actually die, was just like gravely wounded, and then again an epilogue could see them in the hospital. Like I just felt like there would have been a little bit more teeth to like the kids being like, we have to stop hiding. Like the Great Barrier is a metaphor for how we're all also hiding in a safe way, and we need to step out and experience the world. But yeah, sometimes when you step out in the world, you step into a bear trap. And I realized in some sense Jod is that, but I was kind of looking for a little bit more of a snapback to our characters as they make that decision. But more or less, it kind of all works out for them as they choose to be courageous.
Right. The kids manage to call for help, right? KB gets the ship, calls for help, and then X-Wing show up, and Jod's, Neil, the pacifist, gets to fire a massive cannon at the pirates,
which was sick.
It's like, dude, Neil probably killed some people. Neil probably killed Steve Urkel. You know what I'm saying?
I don't think there were enough escape pods at all in that pirate ship.
It was weird to see Jaleel White as the Jod's replacement on the ship, though.
Yes,
this is the first major role I've seen him in since Steve Urkel, and he did a fine job.
Good for him.
Yeah, good for him. Okay. Anyway, KB ship crashes. Everyone's worried about her. They all rush to go see her, and she falls onto a massive pile of Old Republic credits, and she's fine. And Wim looks up at the sky and sees X-Wings, and it's like, hey, the space adventure he always longed of has finally arrived on his planet. Meanwhile, Jod gets a devilish look on his face, and we don't know what that's about. But we assume he's alive and he made it out of there okay. So that's basically what happens. Patrick Klepek, I was reading IGN's review of Skeleton Crew. I saw this comment by the commenter Majority of One, which I have to say I endorse. So the review wrote the phrase "We all like Wim," right? And this commenter wrote, "We all like Wim. No, he is the worst child character in Star Wars, possibly all of media. All the kids were pretty bad. Look at what the review said about the conclusion of their character arc. The bully got to bully her mom. The daydreamer whose daydreams always got everyone in trouble got to fulfill a daydream. Then, for some reason, the pacifist got to kill people with a giant cannon. They are all one-note characters who stayed one note. 3 of their arcs ended on that note, and for some reason, one completely flipped with no development." End quote. And I agree that these kids learned nothing, as you kind of indicated in your in what you were saying just now, that they changed basically not at all during the course of this show, and that's not necessarily the worst thing in the world. But I think that I felt nothing, watching. Like, I think the idea is like, oh, having been together for this wacky and wild adventure, I'm like deeply moved at their concern for each other at the end of this show, and I'm open to that. Like, I'm a sentimental guy, although you might not believe that from hearing me talk on Decoding TV. Like, I'm open to those kinds of like displays of emotion, and in fact, I actually felt that in last episode. Remember last episode when they're all kind of getting terrorized by Jod, and they're all like on their knees, and like it's like a really desperate state for them. It's like, oh wow, like I'm really feeling for this. And I didn't feel that kind of emotional catharsis this episode of like, wow, like the kids finally came together and decided how much they appreciate each other. Yeah, it didn't work for me. Like, the arcs didn't work for me. The kids' connection didn't work for me. Patrick Klepek, did it work for you?
In the sense, I don't know, I guess relative to my expectations along, like as I watched the show, like it more or less matched that. Obviously, I think if you were hoping for, I don't know, like a better show than it was, then like, yeah, I guess it didn't like meet. It met my expectations for like essentially the show I had been watching. Absent, I think the disappointment that you and I both share of it just. I can't tell if like they cut sequences at the end because like, here's my conspiracy theory. Like, the response to The Acolyte and it just having completely obvious teases and setups for a second season that leave such a foul taste in your mouth over the fact that they will never be resolved.
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's what happened here, but the way the camera pans up at the end of this show is very much like, and we're going to dissolve and then cut to 1 month later. And it's like, did they just not do that stuff because it's better to just leave things a little more unresolved than it is to leave people with a sense of adventure that might never come? I don't know.
Well, I think what you're hinting at is this feels like a complete story that abruptly ends, as opposed to, hey, we're teasing all these things for season 2 that may or may not ever happen, right?
Which I think falls in line with, I think, for a show that is like a solid B. Like my thought of like, hey, it doesn't sit and just like obsessed over the mysteries of Ad-Adden. Great, let's focus on the characters. We did it. Did they have like complete arcs that fully landed? No, but you had the right intention. Like, there's so much of this show that is like heart in the right place.
Yes,
and like
absolutely.
If I could choose 2 paths for like where Star Wars spent its time, like as a property, as a franchise, as a world to be interpreted and explored, it's this. So part of, I think, what happens here is like so much is some I think our collective disappointment in what Skeleton Crew isn't is in some ways a reflection of like what Star Wars hasn't been, because it's like, oh, you could just like, same with Andor, like you could just do this, which is too simplistic to just like make something great. That is difficult, but like the amount of like wax that Star Wars has taken at like just embracing nostalgia and the past and not trying to blaze a new trail, and then the times that like it has, like sometimes it's led to interesting things. And Skeleton Crew, I think, is a gesture in a different direction to interpret Star Wars. And so I'm with you. I wish it was better, but I do find myself awfully satisfied with where it went, even if I left wanting a little bit more is not usually the state. Like, I realize that is
right.
like bottom of the barrel expectations, but I think it is true for a lot of the Star Wars stuff. It's like to be left going like, man, I just wish there was a little bit more here. Like is like a good place to be, as sad as that sounds coming out of my mouth.
Yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with you. I guess I would say that some of the basic components of what this show should be are, in my opinion, pretty poorly done, right? Like the relationship between the kids, the added mystery, like this movie has been made many times before, or this show has been made many times before. We know that because this show explicitly references the things that it is referring to, right?
Can't exist without them.
It can't exist without things like The Goonies, right? And E.T. and other 80s movies that inspired it. And those movies all did, in my opinion, a better job of, say, selling the relationship between their main characters than the show did. And yeah, I guess that's something that sticks out. Like you compare this to like other shows we talk about here on Decoding TV, just like the relationship between the children is like so poorly developed. The arcs are so poorly developed compared to like other shows we talk about. It feels like a shame. That said, I agree with you. Like it feels like it ends super abruptly. There's all these questions I have. Like it's like, hey, Wim, you don't need to take that test anymore. Oh, okay, cool. I guess that's a good lesson.
But then what did he do? You know what I mean? Sure, maybe we pick that up. And I will say, like, this is a like just a general problem I have with a lot of sort of prestige television that's made these days. It's not made by television people. It's made by like folks who work in film. Like that's the entire history of John Watts, of Christopher Ford, who he co-created the show with. That's true of like a ton of the prestige television, especially in the franchise work that we get in like worlds like Star Wars and Marvel and other places. And there's a big difference in writing characters and arcs for episodic storytelling. There's a reason for so long. If you wrote in television, you probably didn't write movies. If you wrote movies, you probably didn't write television. These days, it's very mixed between, and that has led to some really interesting work. But I think it also leads us to work like this that feels a little incomplete because it's just inexperience in the work of developing characters and telling stories in a different medium. And the Skeleton Crew, is there a world you can imagine the story told as a movie? Sure. I think it's better as a television show. I just think it's a flawed television show that in some ways is reflective of a broader problem I have with a lot of the way these are made these days, which is they're not made by television people. And thus you can start to see the flaws in a misunderstanding or just, I guess, being amateurs at like making a television show that takes advantage specifically of how you tell stories and characters in that medium.
I think that's a great point. We've seen that again and again with some of the Marvel stuff and also some of the Star Wars stuff. But yeah, I was also going to say all the interesting points about Ad-Adin, right? Like that's how did society reorganize itself after after the supervisor was killed? The Great Barrier is down. Like literally, this is like the Battle of Yavin for Ad-Adin, right? Like everything from Ad-Adin's history will be organized to before and after this event, and none of it. And as we already said, like the kids don't really learn any lessons at all. Fern does learn a lesson about caring about her friend and making sure she's cool with her capabilities and stuff like that. But like Wim, like
this was kind of my point, but like I wish one of the parents had died, right? Like,
yeah, exactly.
I think like that would have been like Wim like essentially ends this series like this show with like, well, I did something deeply irresponsible, but I had some fun along the way.
Right.
Like that's fine, but like let's say his father, he thinks his father has died and he just like loses an arm.
Right.
I don't know. Like that is like holy shit. Like yes, like it's important to like take these leaps and these risks and not necessarily be boxed in by the world that's been prepared for you by your parents and the world around you, but like there are like consequences to the decisions you make. Yes, and there's basically no cost.
No lesson.
To any
what
of
lessons
this.
were learned? What lessons were learned during the course of the movie?
Space is sick as shit.
Right.
Seems pretty cool.
Don't leave the safety of your suburban house. You know, that's kind of what lesson was learned, which is like
when the X-Wings show up, you should be like, yay.
Yes.
All the pirates need to do is hijack an X-Wing.
Yeah.
Then they're good.
Anyway, so at the end of the day, fun show. You know,
Agreed.
Not a bad show, and like you said, probably the second best Star Wars show we've seen so far, behind Andor. I was disappointed by the end. There's a bunch of potential I felt could have lived up to. Great to see Jude Law on the show, though. Like, that is truly a great character that was created, and I hope we get to see him again. That'll be a lot of fun. But yeah, it was fun and a pleasant diversion. But in my opinion, nothing more. Patrick Klepek, would you agree with that? What do you think?
I think it is. I think it's more than that. But I'm with you in that I wish there'd been more here. And again, this speaks to a broader criticism I have of how this prestige, expensive television show is made these days. If this show is made for, I'm going to pull a number completely out of a hat, $40 million instead of $120 million. Television gets better when it has more time to develop its characters. It is intrinsic to the medium. The best shows have more time, more seasons to figure themselves out. What is good about the characters, what is interesting about the characters. When you have to pack that all into one big swing with spectacle along the way, that's hard. That is incredibly difficult to do. And it's very easy for me to imagine a Skeleton Crew season 2 being much stronger, much more confident once you realize what are these kid actors good at? What are they bad at? Like, what's good about these kids? Like, there's a lot of material here that I'd love to watch another like accidental adventure with these kids and how Ajad came into it. I expect we're not going to get. That's probably not going to happen if I had to take a guess on it, and I think that's unfortunate. And again, it's a misreading from like the companies who make this stuff. Like if you commit to television, you should also be committing to seasons so you can actually give these shows a chance to find an identity. I think Skeleton Crew did find that, but I don't know that it'll ever get the chance to truly realize that because of the nature of how they made it.
I do think it is notable that so few people watched it compared to other shows. Like I think we had a great talk about this when The Acolyte came out, about how The Acolyte's cancellation. I mean, you and I were not huge fans of The Acolyte, if I recall correctly, but we felt like it was good for Star Wars that The Acolyte existed, right? That it's like
the show captured the culture in a bad way. I don't know how much that fueled its ratings, at least early on, but it was in the conversation in, again, many racist and terrible ways, but nothing like that caught on with Skeleton Crew, for good or ill.
Yeah, and I think there is this idea of first of all, I'm kind of like sad that this show that we actually overall kind of liked has done so badly, but I think there's just this kind of allergy to anything that they don't recognize in the Star Wars universe, right? Anything that's new or a different direction from what has come before.
Well, if it's that expensive, right? But that's also that's a problem with like Disney running it this way, right? Like Agatha all along, right? Like what we've understood about the reception to that was, sure, it was not a particularly well-watched show, but it got better with time and had a very modest budget. And I think the pressure that is put on these shows, that's like, hey, you're going to be super expensive. You do not get to rely on any of, either by choice or by like edict. You can't rely on any of the iconic image of your characters to just cheaply draw people in.
Right.
Well, I can't believe you didn't make something iconic that like stood the test of time, like on this one go. Like that's just, that's really hard to ask.
I agree, but I think it's also that like if a fan base rejects anything outside the norm, like it essentially becomes like a death spiral, in my opinion. It's essentially like all you can do is just keep repeating yourself forever. You just keep making a copy of a copy of a copy until complete death and irrelevance. In my
Almost
opinion.
like Star Wars has just catered to nostalgia for a very long time, and now finds itself in the death spiral over that.
It's almost like they might have made their own bed in this situation.
Yeah,
I don't know. I would not go that far, but I think that the complete sort of collapse in ratings for the show, along with what happened with the Acolyte, does not spell a bright future for this franchise, in my opinion. So anyway, all that said, we had a good time, and we hope you enjoyed listening to our conversations about Star Wars Skeleton Crew right here on the Decoding TV podcast. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.